Bill 67.
Yeah.
Okay. There's now anti-racism. But
that legislation promotes racism,
Yeah.
in my view. To look at someone and say they aren't the same color or the same culture, and therefore, I don't like it, is wrong. Everybody should have freedom of thought as long as it's not against the laws of mankind. We are creating, by so many of our this racism debate, we are creating a racist society.
hello, my name is Barry Bussey, and welcome to Freedom Feature. And with me today, I have Stephen LeDrew. Stephen LeDrew is a lawyer, he's a broadcaster, and a political operative, or at least he was. Stephen, great to have you with us.
Lovely to be here, and thank you very much for having me. And thank you for using the word operative as opposed to political hack. But I'm still a political person.
Right.
Because politics is extraordinarily important.
Sure.
And I study it, I talk about it. But I was president of the Liberal Party of Canada from 1998 to 2003, 5 years, longest serving president. I was, and that was an elected job. And a lot of people say, well, so you elected this job. No, it was a big job, yeah. It was a volunteer job.
Yeah.
And it was a great experience.
Well, it sure would have gotten you connected to who's who, probably.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And but as one senator said afterwards, he said, well, Stephen, he said, you had to usher Mr. Chrétien out of office. And I know that a number of Martin people said you didn't do it fast enough. And Chrétien people said you did it too fast.
Yeah.
I was just going by the rules, which no one wanted to go by. And the national executive at the time was 50 people from coast to coast to coast. And we all pulled together. And the senator, very wise senator, he said, and everybody is cheesed off with you. So you must have done a good job. Sort of come right down the middle. Yeah. Both forces were not that happy with it. Right. Because we, the executive, we just followed the rules. There's a constitution. It's different now. Yeah. But different constitution, but also a very different party. It was a party at that time. It was an institution. It represented a number of people in different walks of life. And it was somewhat independent of the government, which it should be. It was not part of the government. And Mr. Chrétien was the leader of the party, and he would come, and there'd be some tough questions put to him, and he always carried it out with aplomb. It's not like the party now, which is really, in my view, just a cheerleading group for the prime minister. There's no... From what I can understand, there is no give and take, and there is no influence on the prime minister. And we see that in daily life.
That's fascinating, because it seems to me that in order for democracy to work, political parties are extremely important for the expression of the political opinion, of will, and so on of the people. But if the party is not reflecting the people, but reflecting a leader, then that, it's like the
bunch of sycophants.
Yeah.
And you and I both know from law and from life that if there are no rules, and if there's no one there saying, well, maybe give this a second thought, or let's talk about this, and you just go blindly down the way. And we have a prime minister right now who not only is not educated to be thoughtful, and when he says everything's appropriate, I always shudder, because how does he know what's appropriate? And there's not a party which is saying, let's take another look at this. Yeah. And so I think that makes for bad government. So parties used to be incredibly important in the parliamentary tradition that we have from Britain, and look at the democracy in the United States. They used to be very, very important. They still, in the United States, exercise an influence. I'm not certain it's a good influence, but it's parties are important because they are ultra government, in the sense that they are sensitive to government, they're sensitive to people, but they are not part of the day-to-day government.
I have been, struggling with the question of the power of the prime minister, the office of prime minister, over the last couple of months as a result of what happened with the truckers and so forth. But even before that, during the whole COVID.
I'm glad you're struggling with it, because not enough people are struggling with it.
just recently wrote a piece that we're going to be publishing. I'm calling it The Unfriendly Dictatorship. Jeffrey Simpson wrote The Friendly Dictatorship.
Yes.
And one of the arguments, as I looked into the literature about the office of Prime Minister, is that part of the argument that, for instance, Ian Brody makes in his book, The Center of Government, and he's like, well, the Canadian Prime Minister, yeah, I can see where your argument about it being a dictatorship it comes from, but really, the Prime Minister is checked by various things, i.e. the Parliament, the party is one of those. But yet, when you look at it, the Elections Act itself gives tremendous amount of authority to the party leader. And now we have a situation where our current Prime Minister is, in fact, the party, would you say?
Oh, absolutely.
It
is a dictatorship.
Yeah,
I mean, there are very few checks and balances on it. And even when I was, president, so that was 20-some years ago, Parliament sat. Parliament had, a lot of influence, and certainly Cabinet did. But actually, maybe it's in the genes. Since Trudeau won, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, the Prime Minister's office in the Langevin bloc has becoming increasingly more powerful. And, you look at the Prime Ministers, even with Pierre Elliott Trudeau and Brian Mulroney and Mr. Chrétien, strong ministers. And a strong caucus.
Right.
And Parliament that, whether it's majority or minority, that people pay attention to. Now, Parliament, when it sits, is hamstrung. Cabinet does not have strong personalities in it, and they're all kowtowing to the Prime Minister. And so, he is a dictator. And he does what he wants. And which is why I would argue that we have some pretty bad government, and it's hurting Canada these days.
To go ahead and freeze people's bank accounts because you disagree with their opinion strikes me as rather ruthless.
But the point is, well, it's not only ruthless. I would suggest that it's unconstitutional, it's illegal.
Right. Oh,
However,
absolutely.
The problem is that very few people have noticed that. Very few people have commented on it. You read our press. Yeah. There's no outrage about that. One of the reasons is the press is paid by the Prime Minister's office.
Andrew Coyne, who I've read, for a long time, but he made a comment on a tweet where he said the silly things that people say. So he says, that this was after the Prime Minister gave up the. It says that he no longer needed the powers under the Emergencies Act. And then Andrew Coyne was making light of the fact of those who were raising questions about him being a dictator and all the rest. And then he says something like, well, the silly things that adults say. And I'm like, no. I mean, it's the silly things that the journalists don't say that seems to me to be a very big problem in this country right now. And one that it's almost like, is everyone on Prozac or is it just me? Like, what's happening here?
Well, I just think that part of it is the development of or non-development of our democracy. And I know that with the taps flowing with money from Ottawa, not only people, citizens, but also businesses will not raise a voice of criticism or even, let's just take a sober second look at this.
Yeah.
No one is doing that. Very few people. You do it in your commentaries. I do it in my commentaries. And some journalists do. Andrew Coyne, I think he was wrong on that when you were just quoting him. But then just a few days ago, he wrote another column saying, with reference to the Conservative Party leadership going on, he said, this country is in need of stable leadership.
Absolutely.
And, leadership that is thoughtful, that is perceptive, that understands what's going wrong in our country. And there are many things going wrong in this country. Instead of just blithely going along and saying everything is great. And as the Prime Minister says, we've got your back and we're going to grow the economy and everybody's going to be happy because I am giving everybody lots of money that we don't have.
Yeah, it's just
We're getting suckered in, I think.
Absolutely. And so then the term they often use is soft totalitarianism, right? Yeah. And in a sense,
that's an oxymoron, isn't it?
Sure, absolutely, sure it is. But it's like we're going to be so kind, and in the meantime, we're going to take away your freedoms, and it's that kind of.
You give us permission to do this, which we have done.
Yeah.
And you're right. It is soft totalitarianism. We're just sort of going to sleep.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But that is reflected not only in our politics and our democracy, but it's reflected in day-to-day life in Canada. We are just sort of sheep being led off to pasture.
I think one of the great lessons that we've learned from the 20th century, or at least the lessons of history that we should be aware of,
right,
is the idea that, if you don't stand up to the injustices that are being done to other people, then no one is going to be standing up for the injustice that's going to be done to you. And that is one of the things that I find so extraordinary, that people say, well, I'm glad he took the bank accounts because, I didn't agree with that protest anyhow. It went way too far. They overextended the stay, as it were. But then I'm thinking, okay, but if you are animated on whatever subject it is coming up down the road, and then because you've got an unpopular opinion and your bank accounts are taken, what about then?
Wait until it happens to you. And we have had so many. But first of all, I think when people were saying, "Well, I don't agree with it," fine, you don't agree with it. That's a protest. I happen to agree with the truckers. I think they did stay too long. They should have made their point, and I thought they made it, wonderfully, and then leave. You've made your point, and so it stayed on. And also with any protest, as you well know, there's always people who will come along and infiltrate it and
take advantage.
Take advantage of it. Take advantage of the crowd. But our journalists, by and large, and CBC is the worst offender of this, would just point to a flag, to a Confederate flag or to a Nazi flag and say, "Oh, these guys are all Nazis." Well, that's ridiculous. One or two people, and the rest of the, I've seen other protests in Ottawa, and they said, "Well, there's garbage in the street." Yeah, there's garbage in the street, and truckers put it in bags and left it there for the garbage collection to take it, as opposed to some other protests I've seen was flying all over Parliament Hill. Yeah. But one of the most egregious things I have out of that protest, I believe, not only freezing of accounts, and where the government said, well, we're going to pull off, the Deputy Prime Minister said, we're going to stop their insurance so they can't drive anymore.
I know.
That is not only totalitarianism, that's just unbelievable abuse of power. Yeah. With that one woman, and I don't know all the circumstances of her case, but she was charged with mischief.
Right.
Not murder.
I know. Mischief.
She was in jail for 3 weeks and put in there, and you and I as lawyers know that was wrong.
Absolutely.
And she was put in jail by a failed Liberal candidate from Ottawa who knows where the power lies in Ottawa. That's what power in Ottawa now is. Everybody sucks up to it. Yeah. And it's wrong.
I was mentioning this to Professor Alford, of the Boralaskan Law School up at Lakehead. And he was saying, the fact that we would even come to the place where we would question the judge who made that decision shows you the lack of trust that's developing in our thinking towards the judiciary because of the politics that is going on right now in this country, where we know that who appoints the judges, the Prime Minister's office, who's going to advance the justices, the Prime Minister's office. And so when we get to the place that we begin then questioning, how is it that someone being charged with mischief gets to go in for 3 weeks?
Before they're even found guilty.
Yeah.
There was not even a trial.
Yeah.
This was just on the evidence that there's something here for the charge and put in for 3 weeks. Yeah. I mean, murderers or people who are alleged to be murderers with illegal handguns in the city of Toronto get bail, and then they're out in the street in a day, and then they may be charged again a week later. and they're out in the street. I mean, it was an atrocity that what happened. And that's what happens with power. And it's just when you were talking about the justices, same thing with cabinet ministers, because in the old days of parliamentary democracy, you were a cabinet minister and you had some independence. Now, if you're a cabinet minister, particularly in this government, you don't say anything.
And if you do,
you're going to be out, or you aren't going to be advanced within the cabinet.
Yeah, yeah.
That's wrong.
When you look back over the years, you see cabinet ministers. I think of the guys from Newfoundland, John Crosby, Don Jameson. These guys. Even we got people like Brian Tobin. I mean, who was no pushover either. You know, I mean, so these were big names that
independent thinkers, and that's important to public life.
As we look at the office of Prime Minister, there should be a check with respect to the authority and power in the party. There should be a check on Parliament because we have strong ministers in cabinet and all the rest. There should be a check with respect to support or the opposition being the opposition. But we're not seeing any of that right now in any great extent.
Then the question is, why not? And part of it is because I don't think we have an independent press, by and large, except for, as I said, shows like yours and mine. And also, people aren't demanding it. I mean, that we have a citizenry in Canada, which I think has gone to sleep. And I'm not sure why, although most people's daily concerns are just dealing with, putting their kids to school and getting and moving ahead and working on their lives. I think that people are starting to forget the fact that government is playing an increasing role. Right. It didn't used to play as big a role as it does now, but increasing a role, whether it's on the economy or even just healthcare or other policies, just driving down the road. Everything you do, from the road and all the rules is government. And so I think that Canadians will wake up, I hope they do, and pay more attention to who is ruling, pay more attention to what's going on in the elections. And, across the country, we have municipal elections, we have provincial elections, and people, I think, have to pay more attention. Now, then when they pay more attention, they're probably going to be dismayed. Because oftentimes, Barry, as you well know, Tweedledee, Tweedledum, it doesn't going to make any difference because they're all saying the same thing. Yeah. Well, I think that's going to stop. I think that there are going to be some people with alternatives who want, and this is not to be strident about it. It's not to say that, whether it's left wing or right wing, it's to have some alternatives and some common sense. So it doesn't matter whether you're a socialist or a capitalist. Let's talk about, how we should deal with the public administration. It's very important. Yeah. And our liberties.
Now, I'm also wondering about the increase under this current government. We've got an increased emphasis on people's political views. Like, for example, I use this example many times, but the Canada summer jobs, you had to agree to what the government's position is on abortion, on sexual orientation, or all of the lists of the woke ideology. Yeah. And what's fascinating is that how government has been using the ideological position that we've never seen before, that a government would hold its giving of its largesse subject to whether or not the group had the same opinion. Like, I find that, have we ever had that kind of thinking before?
Not in Canada, to my knowledge. And part of it, I think, though, Barry, is that this government wants to change Canada. This Prime Minister wants to change Canada in his own likeness. And that's not, to my mind, a likeness that many people want. I'm just stunned by what's going on with that. But also when you talk about the woke ideology, it's just that everybody has their rights. And government is saying, well, you have this right and that right, but no one has responsibilities. And no one's talking about a person's responsibilities. And so I think that's also part of the vacuum we have in public policy in Canada, is that, well, it's always somebody else's, right, and or to give me my rights, and I want my rights, but I don't have responsibilities to carry out good as citizenship, and that's I think a serious problem. So we have a government that is careening down a road, and without a lot of direction.
Okay, so the idea you just mentioned about that Trudeau is trying to make Canada in his image.
Yeah.
I mean, that is messianic, right? I mean, that's that's what the great religious leaders of the past, Christianity talked about the idea of being made in God's image. But
God's image is a lot different than Trudeau's image. I mean,
well, I mean, this is the thing, right? Like we've always had this idea that there's something above our law and our system that's beyond us, right? We even have it in the Charter, right? Recognizing the supremacy of God and the rule of law. These are principles that are above the
decisions of Barry Bussey and Stephen LeDrew.
Yeah, exactly.
Above that.
Above that.
And they're principled.
Yeah, but now we've got a situation that says, no, I have the truth of what you need to do. You need to follow me and my ideas on climate change, on all kinds of issues dealing with, what we would consider personal issues, abortion and one's sexual identity and all the rest of it. And yet we're seeing that no, these things are, there's only one acceptable view, right? I mean, you don't want to be a fringe minority with unacceptable views here.
Unacceptable according to
the
PM and the PMO. And it's as I said, it's just stunning to me how Canadians have allowed this to develop. And I hope that things change. And one thing we know is that there's always some constant change in politics.
Yeah.
But the problem with Justin Trudeau is also is do as I say, not as I do. And we know that from his personal background, from his personal history. And it's just one of the biggest hypocrites we would ever find in Canada. So we are, public policy and public life is not what it should be. And we should hopefully get it back. But it's we have big battles to fight. Right. And you and I, as political students and as lawyers and responsible people, we'll have to engage in those battles. And we're going to take a few shots. And I know you have, and I haven't. But it's not a personal battle. It's a battle, as you say, for responsibilities and for instance, the rule of law. Yeah. And we don't have. In many cases now, we don't have the rule of law. Yeah. We have the rule by fiat of the PMO.
People make comments on Facebook and they're all upset with me or whatever. I just, for me, I don't hold any ill will against those people because for me, it's the ideas. Ideas are what are at issue, and it's the ideas have consequences, and they make or break societies.
And we are a civilization.
Yes,
that has been created, by ideas. And this is one of the things that people say it's always just going to get better and better and better. Well, you know what? We are, our children, our grandchildren are entering the era when it's not going to be bigger and better and richer and faster and more, more glorious. Yeah. We are facing some real problems. You talked about climate change. I'm always stunned by people who have been taught throughout the school systems in Canada that, we just have this war on climate change and we're going to change it. And I always look, pollution is terrible. But first of all, there's always been climate change. It's always been changing.
Yes.
And secondly, it's a huge conceit to think that we can stop climate change or climate warming. I mean, show me one scientist who says how we're going to do this. And in Canada, we're making ourselves poorer because if we shut Canada down completely, everybody left, that would not make one smidgen of difference to the world climate change that's going on.
I find it amazing that right now the U.S. and Europe are wanting to wean themselves off of Russian oil. And here it is, we've got loads of oil that could last hundreds of years in this country. I know even off the coast of Newfoundland now, they've found some new discoveries of huge amounts of oil and natural gas.
Natural gas, yeah.
And we're not going to tap it because of climate change. And yet, in the meantime, we'll import, though, from other countries. So in other words, we're not changing anything on the bottom line.
Right.
Although, I guess with this crisis now, with the war and all the rest, they're wanting to say, okay, well, this is a great opportunity now for us to get our electric cars and all the rest of it. Well, I've often wondered about that. Like, I mean, here in Canada, you get -20, -40 weather. How well are you going to do? How many people are going to be stranded midstream in the prairies as they're making their way across because they accepted the government ideology of electric cars when they don't have enough power to be able to get home?
Electric cars are fine for some people, and it's nice to have that choice.
Absolutely.
But again, just what we were talking about, the way politics is going, to have a choice is wonderful. But as someone said, you've got to have an electric car, and you can't have that diesel or that gasoline powered is ridiculous. And and here we are now in a world which is needing more natural gas and oil with the crisis, as you say, the Ukraine war, and the United States no longer has supplies that did, and it's looking to that corrupt nation of Saudi Arabia. It's looking to the corrupt nation of Venezuela. Why? I'm not sure of all the reasons why, but they're looking to Canada, and one of the reasons why is the Prime Minister's office. And they just know that it's going to be difficult. And so Canadians are starting to, and will increasingly, I think, suffer as a result of the decisions of the Prime Minister's office. That's when we should have change.
Coming back to the idea, okay, I love the point. Who are we to think that we're going to solve the climate issue, right? That humans. Now, granted, there are things we can do in our, keeping our in our own backyard, keeping it clean, making sure we're not abusing the environment. There's those kinds of things as well. But to think that we are going to change the weather patterns of the world, I'll admit, I'm not a climatologist. I'm not a person who.
But you read, and I've never read anyone who has said, do X, Y, and Z, and we will stop climate change.
Yeah.
Because there's not even the wackiest scientist will say, we have this conceit. Politicians say, we're going to wage this war on climate change, and they'll fly over to Paris and fly all around the world with other, like Mr. Trudeau, with other planes in tow for his photographers, I guess. And but it's not going to make one bit of difference to climate change. I agree with you, though. I mean, pollution's always a big issue.
Yeah.
And everybody is. It's good that everybody's more attuned to it.
We need to clean
our
up the
fish,
lakes,
and our wildlife and our crops are pure.
Yeah,
that's great.
The conceit of climate change. How about the conceit of controlling a virus? That we can somehow stop a virus from doing its thing. I mean, I wonder, as we are going into reflecting on what has happened over the last 2 years. I spoke with some individuals just last week who were on our program. And he told me that, and again, he's the scientist, I'm not, but he says, this was totally against textbook immunology. And
what was totally against it?
He said the lockdowns, the mask mandates, and also the vaccines. And so, I mean, who am I? I mean, I don't, but again, it's just the idea that we can somehow control things.
Well, we can't. There are certain things that we can mitigate. I think, and so
that's true.
You make a decision whether the vaccine is for you or not, and whether, if you read it, all about it, whether you think that is something that you want to avail yourselves of. But we haven't cured cancer. We haven't cured, liver disease. And so we try, and medical science is, as they'll always say now, is not a science. It's more of an art. Some would say it's a black art. No. Yeah. But I mean, so with the virus, it's going to take years and years, I think, to figure out, truly, if we ever do find out what happened to cause it, All we know is that it's extraordinarily infectious. And what we don't know is how it impacts some individuals, and everybody, different metabolism, more than others. I mean, you know, I guess we may have a world sometime where everybody has had this virus, just like virtually everybody's had a common cold.
Right. Which, of course, as I understand it, is a coronavirus. Or does
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, I always learn things from you, Barry.
No, yeah. This is just what I've been picking up.
Well, you know, that's up to a person to read.
Yeah.
And for people to for scientists and to explore and to see what's going on with it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's what I do know is that's a mystery.
Yeah, and I guess that's my point. My point in saying this is that there are a lot of mysteries. And because there are mysteries, we have to be willing to allow freedom of speech, to be able to determine exactly what's happening. And that's one of the problems I found with this whole COVID-19 pandemic is that, look, I mean, is COVID real? Absolutely. People die? Yes. Okay, so then let's have a discussion. Let's communicate this thing through. And what we've had is we've had big tech, we've had government shutting down debate, shutting down physicians, who've spent I know of physicians who've said, you know what, I'm done. I'm retiring. I'm out of here because this is totally against everything that I've ever stood for, and I'm not going to be part of it. And when that happens, it's like, how are we advancing here?
Yeah, bad politics is thwarting freedom of speech. But you talk about freedom of speech, and we don't have we have freedom of speech because you and I can sit here, and record this and talk. We have that to a degree.
Yeah,
but we don't have freedom of speech to reflect freedom of thought, and more and more, as you referred to earlier, Barry, the woke ideology, which is so prevalent and is something that I go against all the time, is where progressives, quote, progressives say, we know what's best for you, Barry Bussey. It's just, shut up and do it.
Yeah, exactly.
And follow our lead. Yeah. And so we have a big danger of freedom of speech in our country. Or, sorry, not a danger of freedom of speech, a danger of the thwarting of freedom of speech.
Right. Here's an interesting one right now. Ontario, Bill 67. Yeah. Okay, it's going to change the way everyone is going to be looking at things with respect to the schools, the universities. There's now anti-racism, and there is this idea of equity that's being literally right now being argued in the Queen's Park Parliament and the provincial parliament there. And many people, it seems, or at least some, Rick Nichols for one, apparently voted in favor on this legislation for one of the readings. And maybe he voted for both, first and second. And but then when people started questioning, apparently he's like, oh, I didn't realize that equity meant this. And so there's kind of like a use of words and are defined in a very different way. So we got, the concept of equality and we got the concept of equity. And as I understand it, is that equality is the idea that we have equality of opportunity, right? So if you and I are equal, we're able to go out and do our work, and based on the work that we do, the energy we put into it, the learning of the skill that is necessary to do it will determine, we may be able to, you'll make a lot more money than me because you're a lot more skilled, a lot more educated or whatever. And there can be a difference in outcome, but we had an equal opportunity. As I understand it now, equity that's being advocated in the schools is the idea, well, you know what, LeDrew, you're a guy who left Newfoundland, or at least your family left Newfoundland, but I'm from Newfoundland, so I should have just as much as you, and we are going to be equal outcome. I mean,
it's like how that novel was so prescient, Fahrenheit 451, where they said, okay, you can run faster. Okay, Bussey, you can run faster than LeDrew, so we're going to put sandbags on you so you don't run as fast, so you both are all the same. Or like years ago, I'm glad that's gone, where people I know in many provinces were saying, oh, oh, it's so tough when a hockey team loses, so we aren't going to have losers. Everybody's going to be a winner. The problem with that piece of legislation you spoke of, first of all, I am sure that in your audience, listening and watching us now, most people have no idea what that is, because it hasn't been in the press. It's gone through 2 readings, and I haven't seen anything in the press about it. And it's insidious what that piece of legislation is intending to do, because it said, oh, like as that MPP you mentioned, well, it sounds fine, equity, fairness, and anti-racism. Well, yes, I mean, racism is shameful. You can't have, as the bill proposes, a little star chamber in every school if some student or teacher is accused by someone who doesn't like the color of their hair or the fact they have no hair like you and I, of perhaps a racist thought. There's a board of inquiry that's going to be set up to investigate that and to say, damn you for even thinking this. Well, no, there's no rules set up. This is not like a court of justice.
I know, and everyone is supposed to make up their own rules from what I could see in the legislation.
Because every school board has to have now what I think the word was properly accredited equity and anti-racism expert. You and I both know that when the experts get involved in things, we're going to go wrong.
We're in trouble.
We are in trouble with this. This is, it's too strong to say that it's like, Germany of World War II, but it is thought police, and it is creating a huge bureaucracy paid for by a taxpayer to thwart debate, to thwart someone who, and racism is, in my view, shameful. But for the fact that shameful is good enough, that we don't need a whole bunch of bureaucrats trying to judge whether, in fact, what you thought or said was shameful. I mean, that's where our society is going to, instead of being a society based on liberty and thought, is becoming a society based on regulation and on surveillance. So somebody's going to be snitching on somebody else. That's what happened in Paris in the late 1930s. If you didn't like a neighbor for some reason, their dog barked late at night or something like that, that just phone the police. I think that person is a Jew. And that person would be gone the next day. And we have the same thing in Canada. And in that piece of legislation that's proposed, it's anti-black, anti-Semite, anti-Asian, a bunch of other things that you can't talk about, not anti-Caucasian or anti-white.
No.
Because it's fair game in that piece of legislation to say whatever you want. And it reminds me of what an indigenous senator said a few years ago when they were complaining about racism, and in the same discussion, that person, somebody said, well, what about so-and-so? Oh, that's just a white man's opinion. Well, no, that's not racism, though. You can say that all you want because I'm indigenous. I mean, we need a rebalancing, and we need fewer bureaucrats in government paid big salaries to tell us how to think and how to behave.
And then get to define what those terms mean. Like, I mean, that's the other thing that is so insidious here. Like, you get to decide what anti-racism is. And so, it could be anything. It could be, it's obviously Orwellian. We go back to Orwell's 1984, where truth means false, where love means, hate. I mean, war. I mean, peace is war and all the rest of it. And so you and I are Caucasian. And here it is. We're raising this issue. And people will be looking at, there it is, racism, right? These two guys are racist, because they're worried about the fact that in the legislation, there's no anti-Caucasian. But
that legislation promotes racism, in my view.
Okay.
It to look at someone and say they aren't the same color or the same culture, and therefore, I don't like it, is wrong. Everybody should have freedom of thought as long as it's not against the laws of mankind.
Yeah.
But it's we are creating by so many of our this racism debate. We are creating a racist society. We are doing that when the federal government says we are setting aside $20 million for black families in Toronto to buy houses. Well, why should it be just black families? Yes, black families throughout our North American society, far less in Canada than in the United States where there's legalized slavery and still in many places a racist society. There should not be rules against them. There should not be racism. However, to say, well, because 200 years ago, slavery was outlawed in Ontario, I think in 1791, there was slavery. It wasn't prevalent like in the United States. And we did not have institutionalized slavery like they did in the United States. But, I mean, we do not create more racism now by trying to falsely address that. History's history.
Yeah, and I think we need to obviously accept what happened in the past, learn from what happened in the past.
Learn from it as opposed to saying, pulling down the statues and we're going to have book burnings. They have them in the United States right now. They've had them in Great Britain where, well, that's racist because it's describing what happened 100 years ago. So therefore, burn that book and then we're going to lose the lessons of learning how horrible it was in the name of being anti-racist.
When we look at, like, for example, I hear Dennis Prager talk about, the situation in the United States. And he says, there is many people come from Africa, many different parts of the world. They come into the United States and they come because they're able to get that equal opportunity, move up the ranks. So he would say that, United States, okay, we've had there's been a history of racism, but if you look at the United States today, they've moved a long ways from all the rest. And then in Canada, think about it, the many, many people that come from all the various places around the world, they're wanting to come here. Why? Because it gives
a better life.
Because it's a better life. And we are wanting people to come. We need them to come. But we want to ensure that, Canada makes it so that when you come, you're going to be bringing something with you. You're going to be bringing your talents, your experiences, everything is going to help Canada to be able to be an even better country.
I know a number of people from all different communities, but I mean, let's just say some from the Indian community. They came here from Pakistan, from India, and they are the biggest proponents of what you just said. Because they've come here, and there was a stat just the other day in Ontario, a great majority of immigrants who have been here 5 years own their own homes. Because they want to get here, work hard, they enjoy the freedom, they enjoy the open society, and they enjoy the fact that they still have the ability to get ahead, as opposed to some people who have been in Canada for generations who are now saying, we have to have more rules in place to prevent these so-called injustices ever happening again. That's why I always hear, well, how are you going to make sure this never happens again? Well, it's going to happen again. Stuff happens. Yeah. But if we aren't smart, if we haven't learned the lessons of history, well, it'll continue to get worse as opposed to, having people, protect freedoms. That's all about freedom.
One of the biggest problems here is that we've lost the ability to recognize that it's freedom of the individual.
Yeah.
Right now, we're looking at, like, this whole racism policy is based on identity politics, right? You belong to that group.
That's a very good point.
I mean, it's the individual. Like, even Martin Luther King Jr., right? He says that I be judged not by the color of my skin, but by the content of my character. And we have lost that focus. Now it's, well, we are going to be judged based on which group we belong. Because we know, evidently, now with this new legislation, is that we know that the Caucasian people, by definition, they are racist. They are the ones that have caused all kinds of problems. We know that people from other groups are not racist by definition because they are a member of that minority group. And it's like, no, that's not how we've ever understood the freedoms that we have in our country.
But it's becoming the way that public figures are understanding it, or at least they're saying that to get the votes.
Right.
And I know blacks and Asians, Indians, many people who will not associate with these anti-racist groups. Now, the anti-racist groups will say, well, if you're black, oh, you're an Oreo, you're a white guy inside then, or a white woman inside because you like what it is. No. I said, instead of being black or yellow, I just said, I'm going to go to school and I'm going to, work within this society. That is great. Now there's some racism on that. I'm going to beat it. I'm not going to have legislation. I'm going to be smarter than that idiot over there, whether he be white or black or she or whatever it is, who is saying that, I'm black and I'm no good. I'm going to say, I'm going to be smarter than them and have a better life. Now that, I think, is the way of individual freedom and sensitivity and sensibility. And what's happening for that, that bill, I'm worried about that bill because it was put forward by an NDPer in Ontario, and it's had second reading, as you said, and we have an election in Ontario coming up in June, and I'm concerned about where the government will have the guts to call it for what it is, which is a piece of racist legislation, because they don't want to be accused of being racist themselves.
Right.
In this election. That's what it's going to be an issue. It's going to be a problem.
How do we unwind, or is there any unwinding? Like, some people suggest, okay, well, really this Bill 67 in Ontario is but a confirmation of where we have gone over the last several decades. And this is just, putting into policy what has already happened in the culture. Or is it in the culture, or is it only within the elites in the culture? I think of guys like Peter Berger, and he's a sociologist, and he talks about how these ideas, or these Marxist, we call them now woke ideologies and so forth, were the whole concept of the secularism theory, for example, which is one that Berger really pushed. And towards the end of his career, he says, look, secularism said that as people got more and more educated, they were going to put away religion. Religion was going to just die on the vine. But what we have found is that no, people are still religious, even though society has become more educated. However, he says within the legal profession, within the media, within the academia, they have adopted secularism. And that secularism in those areas have indeed become, the powerful ideological force.
We aren't going to have the freedoms that people think we have with secularism, because there are going to be abuses of it. And every time there's an abuse, someone says, well, we're going to make a law to do that. Or another regulation. With every law or regulation, you need people to, first of all, to impose it. Secondly, to enforce it. And you lose freedom. And we're going to lose freedom of individuals because we just have so many laws. Pretty soon, everybody's going to have a bureaucrat standing beside them, walking along, telling them every day what you can do, what you can say, what you can't do, all these rules are going to be in place.
Yeah, but it's going to be worse than that. It's going to be in our phone, right?
Yes, that's true.
I mean,
instead of the individual, you're right, it'd be cheaper. But we are losing our freedoms to that idea of secularism. When it first came about, cast off institutions, and we're all going to be free. And now we're becoming increasingly less free. Not only in thought, as you talked about with 67, but in our actions, our day-to-day actions. Just more laws, more regulations, and with less freedom, we are not going to develop. We have this great society part of it based in Britain and other societies around the world, here in Canada, which was created by people who had the creative thought or the liberty of thought to either have new businesses or new inventions or new creations. And now you have increasingly a society where there's bureaucrats saying, well, you can't do that. Or you have to go and get a permit. And we aren't going to give you a permit because we don't know what's going on, the impacts of it. And our society is shutting down as far as expanding, not only in a free market economy, but in liberties.
Isn't that interesting? So the moral framework that people operate on.
Some people.
But if we don't have that moral framework, how can we trust one another? Like, I mean, if I go to the store and I buy a product, I have to trust that product's going to do what it says it's going to do, or that the shopkeeper is not simply trying to gouge me. You go into some countries. I've been over to India, and I mean, I have never seen the bartering in my life that goes on there. And but they are bartering, bargaining, I should say. They are bargaining very seriously, right? And for me, I go into a store, I don't even worry about saying, okay, well, no, I just trust that this is a fair price, really. And I pick it off the shelf, I'll pay for it, go on. But as that trust breaks down, because we can no longer trust one another, we are losing more and more freedom with respect to that, it seems to me as well.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right on that. And part of that, when the trust breaks down, though, that's when people say, well, there ought to be a law. And you're going to have some politician currying favor with that and looking for, elect me, and I'll make a law for this.
And then when the law is made, the law is deemed to be moral.
Yeah.
Right? Because who would make an immoral law? But
exactly with Bill 67, you look at all the words in there, anti-racist, for equity, and for not equality of opportunity, but we're just going to make sure that no one is ever picked on or no one is ever criticized, and it's all going to be perfect. And so it sounds great. That bill is insidious. If it gets passed, it's not only going to create a huge bureaucracy, it is going to stifle the next generations of kids and teachers. And it's going to be, there's going to be witch hunts out for people, and it's going to be nefarious. And yet it sounds like a great thing.
Well, I mean, I think of what's happened. Harvard, Yale, and others have been really hammered lately because the Asian students getting high marks and getting high acceptance level in those universities, and now they've been trying to throttle that back because they have gotten ahead of some other groups that they want to have to create the diversity. And it's like, so because in that case, as I understand it, the Asians work so hard to do so well, you're going to squash them down so you can...
equality of result as opposed to equality of opportunity, and that is also racist as well. And heaven forbid that you ever want to have someone come to one of those institutions, and it happens in Toronto and it happens across our nation, who has a different idea, who wants to give a lecture which may not be woke, which may not be politically correct. Heaven forbid. Or that some students will say, well, I don't want to listen to this, and therefore he or she should not be allowed to speak. No, if you don't want to listen to it, go to another room.
Go to another room, absolutely.
But, don't stop someone coming from having a public discourse on today. It's like somebody walking into your studio right now and saying, I heard you two. I don't like what you're saying, and therefore you can't say it.
Yeah.
Baloney. But that's the way we're going. And it's important to, for your show and my show and some other shows, which will not be on the the public broadcasting,
No.
because which is not woke. It's not politically correct.
Let's just use this to go to this for a little bit. Talking about the public broadcasting and the fact that the government is paying them. I'm trying to understand the genius of this, or the genius behind this. I mean, I can understand from, for example, the Prime Minister's point of view. This is great, right?
Oh,
pay the
perfect.
money because I know that,
I call the shots.
I call the shots.
You get the money, yeah.
But how can we as Canadians say this is a good thing?
Well, first of all, most Canadians don't know that. They know the CBC is paid billions, but most Canadians don't know that the government pays newspapers, subsidizes the newspapers. And you know darn well that if whatever newspaper it is, there's a few that are still independent, like the Sun chain across the country.
But are they receiving government money?
I know people in that paper, and their parent company is receiving some government money, but there is pushback, which is good. They're saying, that's the one organization which is saying, notwithstanding that we're getting some government money, we're going to say what we think we should say, and if you don't like it, stuff it. Okay. The other papers, though, are all saying, some reporter comes out and reports, or a columnist gives an opinion, and the government doesn't like it, then the paper's not going to print it. That's what's happening in our country.
And that is not a free country.
No. Well, that's when your point of liberties is we have to continue to fight for them, which is why you and I are sitting here in your studio, as opposed to in the studios of the CBC, having this discussion, because the CBC would not allow this, because they know that the Prime Minister's office would not like it.
He who pays the piper plays the tune, right?
Yeah.
Canadians have really got to sit back and begin questioning things. And I think one of the great things about your 3-minute interview is that, it's quick, it's fast. People can sit down and not like this program where you're...
No, you have a greater discussion of it than you and I are having on my 3-minute show. But I just know that there's shows like yours where there's an in-depth discussion, and other shows around, and other people in this busy life. I'm not saying I agree with it, but they say, well, a lot of people just say to me, 3 minutes is great. It's just great. It's all I want to hear.
Yeah.
I can give enough, there's one out every morning. I can get enough to think about during the day with, provocative guests such as yourself and others who sit there and talk about an issue. Okay, I got it in 3 minutes, and I don't have to waste a lot more time.
Yeah,
and let me think about that.
What is great about your program is that it gives that shot, that awakening to say, hey, there's something else going on here than the government's narrative or the media's narrative on whatever the issue is. And I think that's extremely important. And we've got to, I think as Canadians, we've got to increase our curiosity. What is happening here?
That's a very good way of phrasing it. You're absolutely right. I wish I had thought of that. But when I was struggling before to talk about what should happen in Canada, I think you're absolutely right. You just phrased it. Canadians have to become more curious. And with curiosity comes thoughtfulness, and saying, is this really what we want? And the way we should be going. We aren't lemmings, and we didn't build this. What is still a free and open society, relatively free and open, relatively compared to what's going on in the world.
Oh, absolutely.
We didn't build this by pulling the covers over our head and staying in bed.
Yeah.
There's people out there who built this terrific and great country. And what I think is that we're not in imminent danger, but we are sliding down the wrong side of this slope of being a bunch of lemmings that are just following the government, and there'll be people won't like someone getting ahead of another person, or one team being better than another team. They're going to have not only equal opportunity, but equal results, which will be pernicious and insidious as far as a society being allowed to build. And just look, Look at Victoria's school board, Victoria in BC. Last year, we're canceling the classes for really smart kids.
Yeah.
In the name of, quote, diversity. What the heck? Most of the really smart kids probably were of a minority. So they say, well, in the interest of diversity and equity, it's not equity, equal results.
Yeah.
So we don't want special classes for kids who find the ordinary classes, are, for whatever reason, God's gift to them, or, they're take classes at home where their parents are teaching them, where they are bored in the ordinary classes because they have already learned that. So get rid of all those special classes so that those smart kids can go back and dumb down.
Yeah.
And that was a school board.
Yeah.
And in the announcement of that, Barry, I read the announcement, and there were so many grammatical errors in that announcement put out by the school board. I had to laugh. I said, whoever wrote this obviously never went to school.
Incredible.
It was. But that's what's happening. And then there's, again, when you talk about the need for curiosity, there was no outcry about that. There was nobody across the country that said, well, I did, but there are a few others saying, this is really stupid.
Yeah.
Or that woman who was jailed.
Yeah.
That was a sinful crime to put her in jail for 3 weeks. She had not even been found guilty. For a federal cabinet minister to Marco Mendicino, who was our minister of, he was a part-time law professor before, our minister of public safety, to say on public TV that we had to bring in the Emergencies Act because we had reports that those truckers were going to rape the women of Ottawa.
Oh, come on. Yeah.
And no one, the thing is, first of all, for a minister to say that, and then without any evidence, and there's been no evidence since then, but the thing that gets me is that no one has challenged him. I did, but I'm not on big time broadcasting.
Right.
But no one is out there saying, wait a second, buddy, you just can't go around and castigate the reputations of all those hardworking truck drivers and the people with them who came to make a point. And it wasn't just about vaccines. They were making the point that this whole government, they're just fed up with the stupidity of this government. And then and for no one in the public debate to say, Minister, you owe them an apology. Because there's lots of hardworking people who drive trucks to give us the living that we enjoy. And you've just caused them. But the Prime Minister is the chief proponent of that. Yeah. Because I know 2 MPs who lost not only their political careers, but also their reputations, because the Prime Minister said, I'm kicking you guys out of caucus because I heard an allegation of some sexual misconduct. Nothing proven. And indeed, when the facts came out later on, in one of the cases at least, there was no sexual misconduct. But the Prime Minister went out for his own political gain. Guilty. And he ruined the reputation of those people. And he has set the example for the Minister of Public Safety to go out and say, oh, you truckers, you're out there intending to rape. And one woman said, well, Minister, said in commentary, if you thought that, why did you not do something about it to try to prevent it?
Yeah, exactly.
But you ruin reputations, and that's the insidious, negative, evil nature of this government to try it, and they're making their cheap political points.
I'm reminded of Catherine McKenna's statement when she was down in that St. John's bar, where she said, look, we have learned that if you make a point and it's your point and you repeat it and you keep saying it often enough, people will believe it. Yeah. And that's the situation. People will believe it, because how could we ever, it's very difficult, right? It's very difficult for you or I or for everyone in our country to say, is it possible that our political leaders would mislead us? I mean, that causes some serious consternation, right? I mean, there's a dissonance here. We trust our political leaders. We expect them to tell us the truth.
And we should. We should trust them. And we should expect them to tell us the truth. What's happening now, though, because that trust has been abused.
Right.
And one of the greatest abusers, unfortunately, is the current holder of that office. That office is being diminished by this man. But I mean, he says all the time. And it finally came out in Britain, not in Canadian press,
Right.
but in Britain last week, someone on TV said, that Canadian Prime Minister is an idiot. Because he had a press conference, they asked him serious questions, and he said, oh, we've got your back, and we're growing the economy, and middle-class Canadians are going to get ahead. Well, that's not the question. Answer the question. Oh, we've got your back, and we're growing. Like, same thing. The guy's just programmed to what your point was. You say it often enough, people might just say, well, it's got to be the truth.
That dissonance that's going on there, asking the question, not even answering it.
But our reporters have let him get away with that for
have
years
let
and
him
years
get
and
away.
years.
Yeah.
Years.
Yeah.
And also in Parliament.
Yes.
If, for whenever it infrequently meets these days and the opposition stands up, asks a question, and the Prime Minister doesn't answer it at all. Not even in the same hemisphere.
Yeah.
I mean, completely off and different because he's been told this is the answer I want to get today, no matter what the question.
We're going to come back now to the final point of kind of bringing it together, but it's the idea of the office itself.
Right.
What should we do with respect to this? As I mentioned, I think there's an alignment here. There's an alignment with the press. There's alignment with the professions. There's an alignment with the universities. There's an alignment with obviously the media, as I mentioned, the press, but also the politicians. Everyone seems to be in alignment in many ways with the ideological positions of the Prime Minister, the Prime Minister's office. When we're in that kind of an alignment, our freedom is then at its weakest moment.
Yes.
Because everyone who's anyone will agree and say, yes, we must do this. We must have, Bill 67. We must have, all of these people are racist. Or these truckers are whatever, fringe and so forth. And the Prime Minister now is in a situation where no one is holding him account. Anyone who does has the bank accounts frozen.
Barry Bussey's holding him to account. I try to hold him to account. There should be more people trying to hold him to account. And I hope that in the Conservative leadership, and for someone who's the Liberal Party president for years and years, this may sound a little bit odd, but I hope that in the Conservative leadership, there's a discussion of ideas. And some of those ideas are the ones that you and I have been speaking about. And that people say, vote for me as leader of the Conservative Party, because if I am leader, I'm going to make changes to this. I'm going to take away maybe the subsidies from newspapers, or and with the Prime Minister's office, have more parliamentary oversight. The Prime Minister's office is a dictatorship. Unlike, there's autocracies around the world are gaining, steam. I guess that's what's happening in Canada. But in Britain or the United States, the president and the prime minister is not as powerful in their own sphere as our Canadian prime minister because of the prime minister's office and the lack of checks and balances. And so that has to be part of the public debate.
I think it's important for Canadians to understand that there is nothing in our Constitution that says, here's what a prime minister is to do. There is no reference anywhere. In our Canadian Constitution, unlike the United States, which has just the one document, we have multiple documents, as you know. And our office of prime minister is simply on the basis of our parliamentary tradition. So in other words, we look at how previous prime ministers acted, that then their precedents have set the precedents, and each new advance in the power and the increase of the office, there's no guideline here. And it seems to me that as long as you have someone whom you can trust, that, okay, we can have the benevolent dictator, as Jean Chrétien was often referred to as. But when you have someone who's willing to make the outlandish statements that have been made, who's willing to push and advance the power of ideology, there has to be some check and balance. And it seems to me that we almost need a further visit intellectually, but also within the political realm of looking at this and saying, what can we do? All right. You and I can do it a little bit. We can talk, we can raise the subject, but how do we do that? How do we bring in the power? Because obviously the one who's holding the office will not voluntarily give up power.
I think part of it, the answer is in politics, and good politics. And just when you were talking, I was thinking, some people listening will say, well, there ought to be a law.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure a law would do it. Just like when we were talking about racism, and some people say, well, there ought to be a law. There's a law against hate speech. There's things in the criminal code that you can't say. But this kind of bureaucratic system to try to get rid of racism, which is going to fail, that's just, it's ridiculous. That brings in laws. And I think with the power of the prime minister to say, well, there ought to be a law, may not be the answer. Just like with racism, it's shameful. And the opposition leaders should stand up and say, what the prime minister is doing is shameful, and it's wrong, and it's undemocratic, and it's not in the best interest of Canadians. And that should be reported. And in the next federal election, there should be a discussion about that, and a good debate about that. And you know what? If people say, "Oh no, we don't mind this," going into debt, and we're just paying money like crazy, and because I'm going to be dead by the time someone has to pay it back. Yeah. If you want me that short-sighted, then woe be us. I don't think Canadians are. I think Canadians, once they're alerted to it and have a discussion, will say, well, Canadians have an innate, I think, good sense, and we have, because of previous institutions and because of our culture and the way people used to be educated, people will say, well, this is wrong. We need to have a full and open democratic system without the prime minister being crowned as a king of Canada to do whatever he wants by fiat, which is exactly what he does now. That's got to change.
We need a time to take King John down to the Runnymede Meadow.
Absolutely. Oh, wow. Good for you.
Okay. Great chatting with you, Stephen. It's been
my pleasure. It's been
a wonderful time.
I like being on your show. I like you being on my show.
Yeah, I love it.
3 minutes.
And I look forward to coming again.
Great pleasure. Thank you, Barry.
Well, thank you very much for watching Freedom Feature. And until next time, I'm Barry Bussey. The fight for freedom consists not only in the legal battles in court, but also in the battle of ideas at the universities and in the media. It takes time, effort, and money to keep on top of the debates for freedom. Your donation allows us to keep fighting for all Canadians. Firstfreedoms.ca